Miami has made a desperate $500 million bet on its own survival. And if this bet fails, the city will not just flood, it will drown. Right now, on the southern tip of Florida, a metropolis of 6 million people exists where it was never meant to be. A city built on a reclaimed swamp, a glittering skyline resting on porous, sponge-like rock, surrounded on three sides by a relentless rising ocean. For years, the water has been winning, not in the violent chaos of a hurricane, but in the silent, creeping advance of a sunny day flood. By the late 2000s and 10s, coastal neighborhoods were inundating with seawater on schedule, with the tides under clear blue skies. It was not a crisis, it was the new normal. So the city did something extraordinary. It declared war on the ocean itself. But engineers built one of the most ambitious and expensive urban drainage systems on the planet, a massive network of pumps designed to fight back the sea. It should have been enough. But here's the part you weren't told. The pumps are already being overwhelmed, the water is still rising, and the rock that Miami is built on is dissolving from below. The real question is not whether the pumps work. The real question is, did Miami just build the world's most expensive defense system against a problem that engineering can never solve? We see these stories happening all over the world, complex problems that demand a deeper look. A lot of people watch, get the whole picture, but they forget one crucial step that allows us to keep making these deep dives. They forget to subscribe. If you believe that understanding how our fundamental world is changing is important, take 1 second and hit that button now. It ensures you won't miss the next part of the story. Let's begin. Miami was an illusion from its very first day. The land it sits on is not natural. It was manufactured. At the turn of the 20th century, southern Florida was not a destination. It was the Everglades, a vast, untamed river of grass, a colossal wetland ecosystem considered by developers and politicians to be nothing more than a swampy wasteland. A governor named Napoleon Bonaparte Broward campaigned on a single, audacious promise: to drain it. He saw not an ecological treasure, but an agricultural and real estate empire waiting to be uncovered. The project was monumental, a multi-decade effort to carve canals, build dikes, and divert the flow of water that had defined the landscape for millennia. They were attempting to tame a subtropical wilderness with dredges and dynamite. And for a time, it seemed to work. The water receded, the muck dried out, and on this newly fabricated land, visionaries and hucksters began to build a paradise. No one embodied this spirit more than Carl Fisher, the automobile parts magnate who saw a mangrove-choked sandbar and envisioned Miami Beach. He cleared the jungle, dredged sand from the bottom of the bay to build up the island's elevation, and laid out the streets for a city dedicated to sunshine and leisure. The Florida land boom of the 1920s followed. Fortunes were made overnight. People from all over America flocked to this new tropical frontier, buying parcels of land that just years earlier had been underwater. It was the ultimate expression of American optimism, the belief that nature was a resource to be conquered, reshaped, and sold. The entire city, from its opulent hotels to its sprawling suburbs, was founded on this single, precarious idea that the water could be held back forever. It was a foundation built on sand and bravado, a city designed for a world with a stable climate and a predictable ocean, a world that was already beginning to disappear. The geology underneath it all was the quiet, hidden flaw in the entire design. Miami does not sit on solid granite or stable bedrock. It rests on a formation known as Miami limestone. It is a type of sedimentary rock formed over thousands of years from ancient fossilized coral reefs, and it is spectacularly porous. Think of a giant block of Swiss cheese or a hardened sponge. Our fragate is riddled with holes, fissures, and channels. Rainwater doesn't just run off the surface into drains, it soaks directly down into the ground, a ground that is already saturated with seawater pushing in from the coast. This is the city's fatal secret. The very foundation of Miami is a sieve. This geological reality was a curiosity for scientists for decades. It was not considered an existential threat. So how do you save a city that is actively being dissolved from beneath? Is there an engineering solution that can account for this? Or is this fight against geography itself something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For most of the 20th century, this porous foundation was manageable. Gravity and a network of drainage canals were enough to keep the city mostly dry, but then the ocean began to rise. Decades of warming climate have caused thermal expansion of seawater and the melting of glaciers and ice sheets, tipping the delicate balance. The rise is not dramatic foot by foot, but insidious, inch by inch. And in a place as flat and low-lying as Miami, every inch matters. By the early 2000s, a new phenomenon had entered the city's lexicon: sunny day flooding. On days with no rain, no storms, nothing but sunshine, high tides, especially the seasonal extreme tides known as king tides, would push seawater up through the storm drains and straight into the streets. Salt water from the Atlantic would bubble up from the ground, inundating roads, swamping parks, and flooding the ground floors of homes and businesses. The ocean was no longer just lapping at the shore. It was coming up from below, through the very rock the city was built on. The drainage system, designed to pull rainwater out to the bay, was now acting as a direct conduit for the bay to flow in. The city's own infrastructure was betraying it. By 2013, the problem had become an emergency. Neighborhoods in Miami Beach were flooding dozens of times a year. Saltwater was killing trees and corroding the undercarriages of cars. Real estate values in perpetually wet areas were beginning to show signs of instability. The paradise that had been built on drained swampland was slowly reverting to its natural state. It was a quiet, relentless siege. Something had to be done. The solution had to be as audacious as the city's original creation. The plan was a brute force marvel of civil engineering, a strategy not to accommodate the water, but to physically fight it. Miami Beach, the epicenter of the flooding, IRA greenlit a $500 million plan to raise its defenses. It was one of the most aggressive and expensive seawall and pump projects ever undertaken by a single American municipality. The core of the strategy was a network of massive pumps. More than 80 of them were planned for installation across the city's most vulnerable low-lying areas. Each pump station is a concrete fortress, housing powerful turbines capable of moving tens of thousands of gallons of water per minute. The concept was simple in theory. When the tide comes in and water begins to fill the streets, the pumps roar to life. They act as the city's mechanical lungs, inhaling the floodwater from the storm drains and exhaling it with immense force back into Biscayne Bay. To prevent the ocean from simply flowing back in through the outfall pipes, engineers installed thousands of one-way flex valves. These rubber check valves allow the pumped water to exit but slam shut under the pressure of an incoming tide, effectively sealing the city's drainage arteries from the sea. But pumps alone were not enough. In conjunction with their installation, entire sections of the city had to be physically lifted. Roads were raised by as much as 2.5 feet, creating high ground where there was none. Sidewalks, curbs, and storefront entrances had to be completely rebuilt to meet the new elevated street level. It was a surreal sight. Construction crews tearing up entire neighborhoods to jack them up, inch by painful inch, creating strange, sloping driveways and leaving some older buildings sitting in a recessed bowl. The sheer scale of the project was staggering. If you're finding this story as critical as we do, take a second to hit the like button. And if you have family or friends who need to understand what's really happening in our cities, share this video with them. It makes a huge difference in getting this information out there. The work was loud, disruptive, and constant. For years, parts of Miami Beach became a permanent construction zone. The noise of generators and pile drivers became the new soundtrack of the city. The cost, initially estimated at around $400 million, quickly ballooned past $500 million, and everyone knew that was just for the first phase in one part of the metropolitan area. The total cost to protect all of South Florida was estimated to be in the tens of billions. It was a tax on geographic reality, a bill for a century of building in the wrong place. And for a little while, it seemed to be working. Streets that had once flooded with every king tide were now an oasis of dry pavement. The pumps were doing exactly what they were designed to do. They were holding back the ocean. It was an engineering triumph, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of a mounting natural threat. But this triumph came with a cost that went far beyond the astronomical price tag, a cost that was being paid in the waters of Biscayne Bay. The water that floods Miami's streets is not clean. It is a toxic soup. It carries gasoline, oil, and heavy metals from roadways. It picks up fertilizers and pesticides from lawns and gardens. It mixes with garbage, animal waste, and whatever else litters the urban landscape. The new pump system collected all of this polluted runoff and discharged it, unfiltered, directly into the bay. Biscayne Bay is a shallow, delicate marine estuary, a nursery for fish, a home for manatees, and a critical part of the region's ecological and economic identity. The pumps were now flooding it with a constant stream of nutrient-rich, polluted freshwater. The results were catastrophic and immediate. Scientists saw an explosion of algal blooms. The influx of nitrogen and phosphorus from the runoff acted like a fertilizer for the algae, which grew in thick, choking mats that blocked sunlight from reaching the seagrass below. Vast meadows of seagrass, the foundation of the bay's entire ecosystem, began to die off. In 2020, a massive fish kill stunned the region. Tens of thousands of fish, from pufferfish to stingrays, died from oxygen depletion caused by the decaying algae and suffocated. I'm floating to the surface in a grim, silent tide. The bay was turning into a murky, toxic stew. Solving one problem had created another, equally devastating one. This was not a failure of engineering. It was a failure to account for wider consequences. It was the perfect, tragic example of a solution that addresses a symptom while ignoring the health of the overall system. Environmental groups who had warned of this exact outcome were horrified. They were watching an ecosystem collapse in real time, sacrificed to keep real estate dry. The city was in an impossible position: poison the bay or let the streets drown. There was no third option. I know this is the second time I'm asking, but our analytics show that our most dedicated viewers are often the most forgetful subscribers. You get lost in the story. We love that. But if you're enjoying this deep rabbit hole of impending doom, please just take a second and hit the button. It is genuinely how we keep the lights on in the research bunker and continue to produce these reports. The ecological damage was a crisis, but a new, more fundamental problem was emerging. The pumps, the multi-million-dollar saviors of the city, were starting to fail. Not mechanically, they were being overwhelmed by physics. Engineers began to notice that even when the pumps were running at full capacity during a high tide, certain areas were still flooding. The water wasn't coming over seawalls or up through the storm drains the pumps were designed to manage. It was seeping up from the ground itself. The problem was the porous limestone. Sea level rise isn't just about the surface of the ocean getting higher. It also raises the entire water table under the land. As the Atlantic pushes higher, it forces more salt water into the porous bedrock beneath Miami. The immense hydrostatic pressure literally pushes fresh water up from below. The city's foundation becomes saturated, like a sponge sitting in a rising bowl of water. The pumps can bail water off the top of the sponge, but they are powerless to stop the water soaking in from the bottom. This phenomenon is what experts call compound flooding. It happens when a heavy rainfall event coincides with a high tide. The pumps are already working overtime to push out the tidal flooding coming from the bay. At the same time, the rain has nowhere to drain because the ground is already completely saturated with seawater from below. The result is total system failure. The streets fill with a mixture of rain and seawater, and the pumps, despite running at their maximum capacity, simply cannot keep up. They are fighting a war on two fronts, against water from above and water from below. And it's a war they are starting to lose. In October 2019, an unusually persistent series of king tides combined with moderate rainfall left parts of the city, including areas with the new pump systems, underwater for days. The $500 million solution was defeated not by a hurricane, but by a confluence of events that climate models predict will become increasingly common. The city had built a wall, but the enemy was tunneling underneath it. The foundation was not solid. It never was. This changes the entire equation. A threat that can be managed with pumps and seawalls is an engineering problem. But a threat that comes from the very ground a city is built on is a geological and existential one, and it forces a question that no one in a position of power wants to answer publicly. Can Miami truly be saved in its current form? The Dutch are masters of holding back the sea. They built a nation on reclaimed land, but their dikes and barriers are built on dense clay and sand, a relatively impermeable foundation. Venice, another city famous for its battle with the water, faces flooding from the Adriatic Sea surging into its lagoon. Its multi-billion-euro MOSE project consists of massive floodgates that can rise up and seal the lagoon from the sea. It is a battle against infiltration from the sides. Miami's problem is unique. It is fighting infiltration from the sides, from the top during rainfall, and most critically, from below. There is no wall you can build, no gate you can raise, to stop the water that comes up through the very earth itself. This geological vulnerability makes long-term projections for the city terrifyingly bleak. The Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact projects a sea level rise of 10 to 17 inches by 2040 and up to 40 inches by 2070 relative to the year 2000. These are not worst-case scenarios. They are considered likely outcomes based on current trends. The existing pumps were designed and built based on past and present conditions. They were not designed for an ocean that is 3 feet higher. At that level, the hydrostatic pressure pushing up through the limestone would be immense. The energy required to pump water out against that kind of tidal head would be staggering, and large areas of the city would be rendered permanently inundated regardless of any pumping capacity. The ground itself would simply be part of the ocean. The financial world is beginning to react to this physical reality. While tourists see glittering condos, bond rating agencies and insurance companies see risk. Moody's, one of the world's leading credit rating agencies, has explicitly begun incorporating sea level rise exposure into its ratings for coastal cities. A lower bond rating makes it more expensive for a city to borrow money for infrastructure projects, including the very climate adaptation measures it needs to survive. It's a vicious cycle. The greater the threat, the more expensive it becomes to fund the solution. The insurance industry is pulling back even faster. As flooding becomes more frequent and predictable, and it stops being a calculable risk and starts becoming a certainty. Private flood insurance is becoming prohibitively expensive or simply unavailable in the most vulnerable neighborhoods. Federal programs are stretched to their limits. A home that cannot be insured is a home that cannot be mortgaged. And a city where property cannot be mortgaged is a city on the verge of a systemic economic collapse. The entire real estate market, the engine of South Florida's economy, is built on the assumption of long-term stability. That assumption is dissolving, along with the limestone beneath it. This economic pressure is creating a new, invisible social crisis. As lower-lying, historically working-class neighborhoods become unlivable or uninsurable, their residents are displaced. Meanwhile, its wealthier residents and developers are pushing inland to higher ground, driving up property values and pushing out the communities that have lived there for generations. Researchers call it climate gentrification. Your elevation above sea level is becoming a new measure of wealth and security. The city is stratifying not just by income, but by altitude. The desperate fight to save Miami is not a fight for all of its residents equally, so the city stands at a precipice. The half-billion-dollar pumps, once hailed as a miracle solution, are now seen by many experts as little more than a temporary and incredibly expensive band-aid. They bought time, but the question is, time for what? The conversations happening behind closed doors are shifting. When engineers are floating ideas that sound like science fiction, injecting grout into the limestone to try to seal it, or erecting a colossal network of seawalls miles offshore. Others are talking about a more managed and strategic retreat, surrendering the most vulnerable areas back to the water and concentrating defenses around a smaller, more fortified urban core. This isn't a conversation about growth anymore. It's a conversation about contraction. It's a conversation about what parts of a major American city are worth saving and what parts must be let go. The lesson of Miami is not that the engineering failed. The pumps work. The engineering is brilliant. The lesson is that engineering has its limits. A pump can move water, but it cannot lower the ocean. A seawall can block a wave, but it cannot solidify a porous foundation. The problem Miami faces is a scale of problem that tools and turbines were never meant to solve. It is a confrontation with geology and climatology at once. The city that was built by conquering nature is now being slowly, methodically unconquered by it. The water is patient. It has time. The city, and the 6 million people who call it home, do not. Miami is not a warning. It is a reality. It is the most prominent test case in a global experiment whose outcome is still unknown. Every coastal city on Earth is watching. New York, New Orleans, Amsterdam, Venice, Bangkok, Jakarta. They are all watching to see what happens when a modern metropolis, with all its wealth and technological might, comes into direct conflict with a rising sea on geologically unstable ground. The pumps are still running. The roads are still being raised. Billions more will be spent. Before we finish, one last reminder. These are not just stories. They are the defining challenges of our time. By subscribing, you are not just supporting a channel. You are choosing to stay ahead of the curve and fully informed. And frankly, with what we've just discussed, we all need to be. Please hit subscribe now. It's important. The city continues its fight, a daily mechanical battle waged by turbines and check valves against the immense passive weight of the Atlantic. The pumps buy another dry day, another week, another year, but they did not solve the problem of the rising ocean, and the ocean is still rising. The very ground beneath Miami is becoming saturated, the city's lifeblood. Its real estate and its sense of permanence is threatened by the slow, silent encroachment of the sea. The half-billion-dollar gamble bought time. Time for new technologies to emerge. Time for policy to shift. Time for people to understand the precariousness of their existence on this porous sliver of land. Whether that time will be used to build a bigger wall or to plan a graceful retreat is the multi-trillion-dollar question that hangs over the city's future. The engineering battle has been fought. The geological war has just begun.